My first job was at a McDonald's just off a lonely stretch of I-80 in Wyoming. It wasn't one of those bustling city locations. It was a pit stop for truckers and weary travelers, a small beacon of fluorescent light in an ocean of darkness. I was 17 and usually worked the closing shift, which meant from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. the store was often empty except for me, my manager Dale, and the occasional road tripper needing coffee. That's when he first started coming in. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with pale, watery eyes and clothes that seemed a size too big for his gaunt frame. He never caused any trouble. He'd order a single black coffee, pay with exact change, and go sit in the corner booth, the one with a clear view of both the front counter and the entrance to the kitchen. He would just sit there for hours, nursing that one coffee, staring. It wasn't an absent-minded gaze, it was a focused, intense observation. He watched every move I made, from wiping down the counters to restocking the napkin dispensers. His eyes would follow me with a predatory stillness that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. The silence of the store, usually a comfort, became a vacuum filled only by the hum of the ice machine and the weight of his unblinking stare.
Dale, my manager, told me to ignore him. "He's harmless," he'd say with a shrug. "Probably just a lonely old guy with nowhere else to go. As long as he pays, he can stay." But it didn't feel harmless. It felt like I was an exhibit in a zoo, and he was a visitor who had paid for a front row seat. His visits became a nightly ritual. He'd arrive at 11 p.m. on the dot and leave precisely at 1:45 a.m., 15 minutes before we locked the doors. He never spoke a word after ordering his coffee. The most disturbing part was the way he'd subtly react to things only I was doing. If I sighed out of boredom, I'd see a faint smile ghost across his lips. If I dropped a tray and flinched at the noise, his eyes would widen with what looked like satisfaction. It was like he was feeding off my reactions, my quiet existence behind the counter becoming his personal form of entertainment. I started to dread the clock striking 11, my stomach twisting into a cold knot. The vast, empty plains outside the windows felt less isolating than the small, enclosed space I shared with him every single night under the sterile, buzzing lights of the restaurant.
The turning point came during a particularly nasty blizzard. The snow was coming down so hard that the highway was closed and we hadn't had a customer in hours. Except for him. He was there, in his booth, a dark silhouette against the swirling white outside. Around midnight, the power flickered and then died, plunging the store into the eerie half-light of the emergency backup system. Only a few red exit signs and a single light over the registers remained on, casting long, dancing shadows. Dale was in the back office, trying to call corporate. I was alone at the front, pretending to clean the already spotless counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard the scuff of a shoe on the linoleum floor and looked up. He was no longer in his booth. He was standing in the middle of the lobby, halfway between his seat and me,
and he was smiling, a wide, toothless grin. The smile didn't reach his eyes, which were fixed on me with an intensity that was nothing short of terrifying. He was just standing there, in the oppressive silence, a dark shape in the gloom, smiling at my fear.
He took a slow, deliberate step towards the counter, then another. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to scream for Dale, but I was frozen, pinned in place by his gaze. He stopped right at the edge of the counter, close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. The emergency lights cast his face in a hellish red glow. He leaned forward slightly, his smile never faltering, and he whispered, his voice a dry, raspy thing I'd never heard before. He didn't say hello or ask a question. He said, "I like it better when the lights are off. You look prettier in the dark." He held my gaze for a moment longer, a moment that stretched into an eternity, before he turned around as calmly as if he were commenting on the weather and walked back to his booth. He sat down and continued to stare, his smile finally gone, replaced by that same flat, observational expression. Dale came out a minute later, announcing the power was out for the whole grid. I couldn't form words to tell him what had just happened. My voice was trapped in my throat.
I never finished that shift. I told Dale I was sick, that I had to go home. I think he saw the sheer terror on my face because he didn't argue. He just nodded and locked the door behind me as I ran to my car, my feet slipping in the deep snow. I quit the next day over the phone. I never went back to that McDonald's, not even to pick up my last paycheck. For years afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, when I'm in a quiet room or walking alone at night, I can still feel his eyes on me. The real horror of it wasn't a threat of violence, it was the violation. It was the way he methodically stripped away my sense of safety, night after night, in a place that was supposed to be mundane and predictable. He turned my first job into a psychological cage and reminded me that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that chase you, but the ones that sit perfectly still and just watch. I worked at a McDonald's in a sprawling suburban neighborhood in Ohio during my college summers. It was a popular spot for families because it had one of the largest PlayPlaces in the area. Saturday afternoons were pure chaos, a symphony of screaming children, exhausted parents, and the constant beep of the fryers. My job was usually lobby duty, which was a glorified term for wiping up spilled sodas and trying to keep the place from descending into utter anarchy. It was a mind-numbing job, but it gave me a good vantage point of the entire restaurant. That's how I first noticed her. She was an older woman, probably in her late 60s, with neatly curled white hair and a kind, grandmotherly face. She would come in every Saturday, sit at a small two-person table right by the entrance to the PlayPlace, and never order a thing. She just sat there, clutching a large quilted bag and watching the children play with a serene smile on her face. At first, I thought it was sweet, maybe a lonely widow who missed her own grandchildren. After a few weeks, I started to notice things that were off. Her smile, which I had initially perceived as kind, never changed. It was a fixed,
painted-on expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes were sharp and analytical, scanning the crowd of children, not with warmth, but with a strange, calculating intensity. She would focus on one child at a time, tracking their movements as they climbed the slides and crawled through the tunnels. She seemed particularly interested in the kids whose parents were distracted, buried in their phones, or deep in conversation. My initial perception of a sweet old lady began to curdle into something unsettling. She was watching them like a predator watches a herd, looking for the one that wanders too far from the pack. I mentioned it to my manager once, and he brushed it off. "She's not bothering anyone, Mark. Don't go looking for trouble where there isn't any."
One Saturday, it was especially busy. I was cleaning up a milkshake explosion near the PlayPlace when I saw the woman open her quilted bag. She pulled out a doll. It was one of the creepiest things I'd ever seen. It was clearly handmade, with mismatched button eyes, crudely stitched yarn for hair, and a body made of what looked like old dish rags. It was something out of a nightmare. I watched as she locked eyes with a little girl, no older than 4, who was playing by herself near the entrance. The girl's mother was in line at the counter with her back turned. The woman held up the doll and gave a little wave. The girl, fascinated by the strange toy, toddled over. I stopped what I was doing, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The woman leaned in and began whispering to the child, her fixed smile never faltering as she pointed with the doll towards the main exit of the restaurant. She was trying to lure her out.
I didn't even think. I dropped my rag and walked over, forcing a cheerful employee smile onto my face. "Hey there, having fun?" I asked the little girl, deliberately putting myself between her and the old woman. The girl looked up at me, then back at the doll. The woman's face changed in a flash. The grandmotherly mask dissolved, and her eyes became slits of pure malice. "We're busy," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. I ignored her and knelt down. "Where's your mommy, sweetie? Let's go find her." I took the girl's hand, and as I stood up, the mother came rushing over, panicked. "Oh my God, Emily, don't wander off," she said. I explained what I saw, and the mother turned to the old woman, who immediately launched into a flawless performance of a wronged, kindly senior. "I was just showing her my doll. I would never," she cried, looking genuinely hurt.
My manager had to be called over to mediate. The woman was loud and indignant, accusing me of harassing her and making wild accusations. A few customers even took her side, glaring at me as if I were the villain. But the mother, holding her daughter tight, believed me. My manager, seeing the potential for a major incident, calmly asked the woman to leave. She stood up, her face contorted with rage, and packed her doll away. As she walked past me, she leaned in close, her breath smelling of mothballs and something sour. "Clever little boy," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You took this one from me. There are always more." The directness of her threat, the confirmation of her intent was more terrifying than any scream or overt act of violence could ever be. It was a cold, calculated promise. We called the police after she left, and I gave a statement. They took it seriously, but said there wasn't much they could do without a clear abduction attempt. They promised to increase patrols in the area. I finished my shift feeling sick to my stomach, the woman's whispered threat echoing in my mind. Every child who came in for the rest of the day looked like a potential victim. It ruined the cheerful, chaotic atmosphere of the place for me forever. I understood then that evil doesn't always come in a monstrous form. Sometimes it comes with a kind face and a grandmotherly smile, sitting quietly in the corner of a McDonald's, holding a doll with button eyes, just waiting for a parent to look away for a single second. I never saw her again at our restaurant, but her words haunted me. There are always more. About a month later, a story ran on the local news about a thwarted child abduction at a nearby public library. The suspect was described as an elderly woman who had tried to lure a child away with a unique homemade toy. They never caught her. I knew it was her. I had done the right thing. I had saved one child. But all I had really done was force a hunter to find a new hunting ground. And that knowledge, the thought of her still being out there, watching and waiting, is a horror that has never left me.
For 2 years, my voice was the most familiar thing about me. I worked the late-night drive-thru at a 24-hour McDonald's on a busy arterial road. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I was Sarah, a disembodied voice taking orders through a crackling speaker. You develop a strange kind of intimacy with the regulars, the third-shift nurses, the cops, the factory workers. You recognize them by their car engines and their standard orders. It was a predictable, almost comforting rhythm, until his voice came through my headset for the first time. It was deep and had a strange, gravelly texture, like rocks tumbling in a metal drum. His order was simple, a large black coffee. But it was the way he spoke, slow and deliberate, that made me pause. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, drawing out my name after he saw it on my name tag at the window. It felt different from the usual pleasantries. He started coming every night, always between 2 and 2:30 a.m., always in the same dented dark green sedan. His order was always the same, a large black coffee. And every night he would make a comment about my voice. It started innocently enough. "You have a very clear voice." Then it became more personal. "Your voice sounds tired tonight. Long shift?" A week later it was, "I bet your smile is as nice as your voice." I started to feel a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest whenever I saw his headlights pull into the lane. I was a faceless voice to him, an object of his focus, and there was nothing I could do but take his order and force a polite, professional tone. The drive-thru, which once felt like a protective bunker, now felt like a trap that funneled this one man directly to me, night after night. I tried to change my routine. I asked my coworker to take the speaker for a while, but he always seemed to know when I was back on. One night, I wasn't wearing my name tag, hoping the anonymity would help, but he got to the window and he just smiled. "Hiding from me, Sarah?" he asked, his eyes crinkling in a way that wasn't friendly. My blood ran cold. How did he know? I realized he must have memorized it the first few times. The job required me to be friendly and engaging, but every practiced
"Have a nice night," I offered him, felt like I was feeding a straight animal that was getting progressively more dangerous. My manager's advice was useless. Just be professional, he's a paying customer. He didn't understand the psychological weight of that nightly 10-second interaction.
The escalation was subtle but terrifying. He started trying to prolong the interaction at the window, asking me questions about my life. Are you a student? Do you live around here? I would give vague, non-committal answers and try to hand him his coffee as quickly as possible. But he would let his fingers linger, brushing them against mine. The physical contact, however brief, felt like a massive violation. It was a clear message. The barrier of the window was not enough to keep him out of my space. One night, he paid for his coffee and then just sat at the window, staring at me. A car horn blared behind him. He didn't flinch. "I was just thinking," he said in his low rumble. "A voice like that shouldn't be trapped in a box." He finally drove off, but his words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning.
The next night, I was on edge the entire shift. I dreaded the sound of his car's rattling engine. When 2:15 a.m. rolled around, his voice came through the speaker as expected. "The usual, Sarah." I took a deep breath and processed the order. When he pulled up to the window, he wasn't smiling. He just looked at me with a flat, possessive expression. I handed him his coffee. As he took it, he said, "My name is Frank. I think it's time we met properly. Your shift ends at 6. I'll be waiting for you in the back of the parking lot." It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was a command. The casual, terrifying certainty in his voice told me this was not a fantasy for him anymore. This was a plan.
I was shaking so hard I could barely function. I immediately told my manager, Kevin, everything. This time, he saw the genuine panic in my eyes. He finally understood. He called the police, who agreed to be in the area when my shift ended. For the next 3 hours, every shadow in the parking lot looked like his car. When 6 a.m. finally arrived, Kevin and another male coworker walked me out to my car, and he was there. His dark green sedan was parked in the furthest, darkest corner of the lot, just as he said it would be. He was just sitting inside, a silhouette behind the wheel, watching. The moment he saw my 2 coworkers, his engine roared to life and he peeled out of the parking lot, disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom.
The police took my statement, but without a direct threat. They said he hadn't technically broken the law. I quit that day. I couldn't go back. I couldn't sit in that small booth, tethered to a headset waiting to hear his voice again. The horror was in the slow, methodical erosion of my safety. He used the mundane structure of a fast food transaction to isolate and terrorize me. He turned my own voice into a beacon for his obsession. I still get a jolt of fear whenever I hear a deep, gravelly voice, and I have never, ever worked a job that requires me to wear a name tag since.